Thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and thanks for staying for our discussion. Before I introduce our panel, let me just take a moment to say a few important thank yous. First, thanks to the Dayton Performing Arts Alliance's Diamond and Rosario members, whose steadfast support makes possible everything that we do at the Dayton Philharmonic, Dayton Opera, and Dayton Ballet. They are the AES Ohio Foundation, the Virginia W. Kettering Foundation, the Kettering Family Foundation, the Shevitz Foundation, the Harry A. Tubman Jr. and Virginia B. Tubman Fund of the Dayton Foundation, the Charles D. Berry Foundation, Paul and Dolores Anderson, Dr. Peter Brown, and Dr. Troy Tyner, Peter and Patricia Fordick, Stephen Lou Mason, and the Miriam Rosenthal Foundation for the Arts. Please join me in thanking them. And special thanks to major supporters of this weekend's performances, the Charles F. Kettering Foundation and the Olive Kettering Endowment Fund, supporting the appearance of Kayla O'Dara and Ben Taylor as this season's Olive W. Kettering Endowed guest artists. Now, please welcome our panel and moderator, Reverend Joshua Ward, Senior Pastor of Dayton's Omega Baptist Church.
All right, good evening, and we certainly thank you all for staying for this important conversation and discussion after such a moving evening. My name is Joshua Ward. I serve as the senior pastor of Omega Baptist Church and also serve as the secretary for the Dayton Performing Arts Alliance Board of Trustees. Tonight's concert has been a powerful, moving, and a courageous experience. And I know that for many of us, it has been incredibly evocative as well. Some of us may be feeling sadness, pain. Some of us may feel anger, frustration. While some of us have simply come to a new realization and awareness of these important American stories that have been lifted up through Mr. Thompson's piece. And as we planned for this evening's performance, we knew that it might stir up these and other feelings and emotions within us, and thus felt it prudent to allow some space for reflecting and processing the stories lifted up in the 7 last words of the Unarmed. Tonight we've invited 4 panelists, experts in their respective fields, to guide us through this process. And I will introduce them as we invite them to share their insights. Our first question is for our incredibly gifted composer of the 7 last words of the Unarmed. I was getting ready to prompt you all to welcome him. Can we welcome him to our Dayton community? He's so grateful for his work and not only his work, his presence. Mr. Thompson is an Emmy Award-winning composer, pianist, conductor, and educator who grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. He received his bachelor's and master's degrees from Emory University, and his doctoral work has been at Yale University. He has accomplished all of this before the age of 40. And after sharing lunch with him earlier today, I am just so incredibly impressed and inspired by not only his gifts, but the intentionality with which you use these gifts to promote and create meaningful and necessary dialogue and change in our world. Mr. Thompson, let me first say again how incredibly honored we are by your presence here tonight. My first question for you is this. Why these 7 men? Why these stories? What was it about their stories that impacted, affected, inspired you so significantly that these stories needed to be included in the conversation?
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you, and thank you, Reverend, for this question. I organized the piece according to the liturgy of the 7 last words of Christ. And for me, within the Christian tradition, the 7 last words of Christ focuses on his humanity. And in the wake of these deaths, a lot of work is being done in the media to eradicate the humanity of these men in order to justify their deaths. And so the liturgy was the guide for the architecture of the piece and also for the words and the stories that I chose. In the pre-concert lecture, I talked about the third saying in that liturgy is Jesus speaking to Mary and John, his disciples, saying, "Mother, this is thy son, son, this is thy mother, take care of each other when I'm gone." For the third movement of the 7 last words of the Unarmed, I used Amadou Diallo's last words to his mom on a voicemail, "Mom, I'm going to college." That maternal connection between the liturgy and Amadou Diallo's last words is why it's in that order. The 7th movement, the 7th saying in the liturgy is, "Into thy hands I commend my spirit." And that connection of spirit and breath led me to use the last words of Eric Garner, "I can't breathe." And so the liturgy was my guide. I used the journalistic research for the last words was done by Sharon Barkey, an Iranian-American journalist based in Brooklyn. And she, in the 2013-2014 time, she, on the app formerly known as Twitter, had a pictogram series where she would pair a simple image with the last words of an unarmed person killed by an authority figure. And so it was from that database that she had on her website and on Twitter that I used those last words and organized it according to the liturgy. And upon researching and looking at these stories ranging from 1999 to 2014, that's where the piece came to be.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Our next question is for Dr. Sam Dorf. Dr. Dorf is a teacher, scholar, artist, parent, husband, and advocate. He is the alumni endowed chair in the humanities and professor of music at the University of Dayton. As a scholar, he often writes about music and dance relations and music in the ancient world. He currently serves as the treasurer of the American Musicological Society and sits on the boards of the Dayton Performance Arts Alliance and the Anti-Defamation League's Cleveland office. Dr. Dorf, while this panel discussion is focused almost solely on the 7 last words of the Unarmed, we know that this powerful composition was kind of sandwiched between a few other musical works. Would you please shed some light on how these pieces might align from your perspective?
Well, thank you. Musicologist is a fancy way of saying music historian. And my particular interest in music history has traditionally been the work of people like Gabriel Fauré, the last composer on our program, the first composer, Lili Boulanger, are two composers I've studied a lot, but I've not studied them in this context. And to me, this was really revelatory, the ways in which Maestro Kittelman programmed these works together to talk to each other. For me, listening to the Boulanger, I kept on thinking about this is a woman whose life was cut so short, so young. And she wrote this truly haunting piece at a time of great uncertainty, fear, violence, and just a disillusionment of everything that everyone knew, which was the First World War, which we heard in those booming drums, the bass drums in that piece. And to me, it also just struck me thinking about the 7 last words of the Unarmed, how Lili Boulanger wrote this music knowing that she would never hear it, right? These are in many ways her own last words too. And she died in a different way, but it makes us think about just the power of grief itself. We were talking a little bit about this before. Like, grief is universal. Thinking about Fauré, Gabriel Fauré was, when he first wrote the first version of his work, he was the organist at a church in Paris called the Madeleine. And I looked up details, what was it when I wrote it down? In 1888, he saw 327 funerals. His job was to play organ and provide music for 327 funerals. In the year before, it was 353. That is overwhelming. That is the kind of grief that no one should have to bear. And the music that he was supposed to program around that time was music that did not speak to him. And he needed music for himself, right? He famously wrote, this was a requiem written for no one, but, quote, for the pleasure of it, I dare say. And it's weird to think of like writing a piece like this for pleasure, but it's also recognizing that within great grief, there's a lot we can do, right? That every horrific thing, we have to turn it into something meaningful and positive. And I like to think of this work as another way of doing that as well.
Thank you so much. Dr. Rosalyn Brown Beatty, often referred to as Dr. Roz, in the field is a licensed professional counselor and the owner of Brown Beatty Counseling and Consulting. She has expertise in trauma-informed therapy and grief counseling. Often known for her passion of speaking and teaching about mental health, her purpose is to make sure that everyone has the opportunity and tools to live their life to the fullest potential and have experiences of joy, even when life continues to happen. Dr. Roz, as I sat in the auditorium this evening, I knew these stories. I had watched YouTube videos of other performances of this composition. I thought I was prepared, but I still had tears in my eyes throughout. I still felt pain in my soul. Would you please share a bit about how these stories lifted up tonight may have impacted many African Americans from a trauma-informed perspective?
Yes, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to do a really quick lesson first before I answer that question. So if you can, hold your hand like this. Okay, this is our hand brain. This is what helps us to survive and keeps us alive. Flip your hand up. Right here, this is where our trauma brain is. This is the part that says that I'm going to make sure that my person gets through whatever it takes mentally and physically. And so imagine there's some smoke coming from the kitchen, and you decide to go in with the firemen and women, the buckets of water, the water hose, but it's just a grilled cheese that needs to be removed from the burner. This doesn't care. You know why? Because at one point in time, there was a really big fire in that kitchen that you either experienced or that you saw. Okay, let's flip our hands back down. Right here, this is our thinking brain. This is the part that we want to come online that does the complex decision making, that helps us to be able to make decisions in the here and now, not only for what we're doing in this moment, but in the future. What that music did today was, it flipped the lids. And so I love that you shared that. I saw this. I watched the news. I watched the YouTube performances. As the production was going on, I stopped and I paused, and I looked around the audience. I paused and I listened, and I heard the sniffles. And so I was like, oh, we all got our trumpet brain online. It was also trying to protect us. And so, in those moments when we hear this music, there's a soothing piece because it actually flips our trauma brain down, but it also does some activating first. And so, even as we were listening to the words, and I thought about like, oh, he cried out for his mother. I'm a mother. If my baby cried out for me. As you listen, as you're like, I can't breathe. Oh my gosh. What if that was me? What was that was my fiance? What if that was? And so it brings our very real experiences, not only their experiences, but our very real experience to life. Part of this process too, as we are hearing this and we're taking this in, is why I love that we're doing this panel too, is then what do you do? Because our trauma brain is flipped. Tell the story. Thank you for telling their stories. Maya Angelou has a quote that says, there's no greater agony than an untold story inside of us. If we all held space for someone to tell their story, you will put me out of business. Put me out of business. And so taking that moment, again, it wraps this up and says, oh, I'm safe. I don't have to carry this with me anymore.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rose. This next question aligns really well, and it is for Mrs. Sierra Leone. Sierra is an incredibly accomplished and highly respected artist and community leader right here in Dayton. She is the executive director and co-founder of the Home of Urban Creative Arts and has received innumerable awards, recognitions, and titles as a result of her work. Most recently, she was appointed to a 2-year term as the City of Dayton's inaugural Poet Laureate at the beginning of February. And she's my friend. Mrs. Leone, as our city's newly minted Poet Laureate, can you speak a bit from your perspective about just kind of, we're dovetailing right from where Dr. Ross left us about the power and importance of storytelling, particularly painful, difficult, and controversial stories from the margins of society.
Yes, and thank you. Thank you, Ms. Boulanger. Thank you so much. The first thing that popped in my mind or came to mind was the debt we pay for human God. And Dunbar just kept coming up over and over and over again. And then sympathy, and then its next piece. And I'm thinking over and over again as I'm hearing the pieces about how they tie directly into things we're living right now. We just did a show over at Black Palette, the Visual Voices piece. And that show celebrated the speech that MLK did when he came in 64. And as poets, we responded to that speech. And one of the poets responded to Kevin Harris's piece, Stop. And it was Fauré Henry Jones. And it was so powerful. And then I'm looking back at this. And then I'm thinking about mama, this word coming up again. And we're hearing it through the eyes of George Floyd, his last words. And you're seeing it over and over again. I know the elders would say, you're not dead until you're forgotten. So if we're talking about stories, they too, like grief, are, I would say, they're a universal metaphor. And beyond the power of conveying knowledge and building connections and exploring the human condition, which is what we're all doing. This is what they said we can't do in America right now. Look around this room. Come on. Come on. They can't do this, everything that we're doing, but there is a saying that says, get out of the way of the people who are doing it. But outside of the human condition, our stories honor the fundamental human need to belong. That's what our stories are doing. That's what you gave us an opportunity to do here. We didn't need to say anything to know that we shared the same value of what it means to live in a democratic society where we could be together. For me, the biggest story that I'm walking away with in this space is I watched a group of human beings, many of them who were not my reflection, tell one of my community stories. That's another tear to humanity. So deep, and something we must grapple with. And so I don't have all the storytelling answers today, because I'm going to go off and be philosophical and quote a whole bunch of poets and, let you all know I'm the damn poet laureate. I want to be human today, right? And lean into what you just did. We can't just grapple with that in a 5 or 10 minute. We need to sit with what we just saw. So that's the story. We're making room for more stories, the ones that are going to come out of this room.
I really want to thank you for your words there. At lunch today with Reverend Lord, I mentioned sometimes I've seen this piece be engaged with different communities in the last decade of its existence, and that the first time you see a predominantly white choir singing these words, for me, I was in that same emotional space that you're in right now. It's a little complicated, but in my mind, I think of it almost as couples therapy. If we think of the relationship between white and black America as a couple, I'm seeing my partner reflect to me my pain. And it shows me that you're starting to understand what 400 years of chattel slavery and continued oppression afterwards actually feels like. You're getting access to my interiority through this experience of engaging this work. And when I see a predominantly white choir singing Mom, I'm Going to College, and the parents of the people in the choir actually getting the feeling of Katia Diallo and what she's still grappling with and feeling, it feels like a step in the right direction. And so I'm so humbled and grateful for that experience.
And one thing too, I love that you shared that, because also too, trauma is passed down in the DNA, so it's called epigenetics. And so us seeing that also too is healing for our ancestors. And so trauma may not be expressed with you. It may be expressed with your kids. It may be expressed with your children's children. It may be expressed further down the line, but it still needs healing on a DNA level. And so also imagine that for that DNA that may reside in us, and it says that, okay, my great-great-great-grandmother didn't have the allies that were there and who would say those words. It was only her and the people who looked like her. Oh, you just healed my DNA a little bit. You just healed my ancestors' trauma by that. And so that's even what I love about this, is because it goes beyond us. Trauma doesn't just stop once you leave this earth. It's in the DNA, not only of the people who are from you, but the people who see it. And so I love that part of it because I was like, oh, we're healing our ancestors.
So I had all these questions that I prepared and sent in, but this conversation is just moving. We have a limited time window. I do want to ask this question to anyone on the panel. For the person who is sitting here tonight in the audience and saying, I feel inspired, I feel challenged, I feel moved. I don't know what to do with this. I don't know where to go. And I think we talked about a few things that are important, continuing to tell stories, continuing to listen to each other. But as best we can, is there any practical guidance or advice that we can share perhaps to someone who may be here and feeling that here tonight?
I think first and foremost, we all are going to just operationalize the word practical. Because our world is changing every single day that we wake up. And so that's a little bit of a moving target in America, right? And no pun, that didn't work. But I want to just move forward with my remarks. Alicia Wormsley, she came forward with in the book Black Futures with the piece, There Are Black People in the Future. And in, I believe, Pittsburgh, she had many iterations of this saying and this quote, and it began to travel and move, and people she worked with, community members, folks she was connected with, sort of kept it alive. And so I think a part of one thing we can do is do the work to keep what we believe in alive. First, that is reflecting. Just go home and reflect. I'm an avid journaler. You don't have to be, just practice bullet journaling. Write down your thoughts. Really, what are you thinking? What are you taking away from this? I think reflecting as well. Outside of that reflecting, educating yourself. The Kettering Foundation, their website is for the win. If you want to be educated on what's going on in the world, so many vast perspectives. The context is a space that I stop to access information and to connect. But locally it's available as well. But you just want to educate yourself. And I believe everyone spending their evening here is educated. And I mean educate yourself in things that you may not be comfortable with. Things like police brutality. We have a lot of police reform going on here in our city, and so much work being done with that already. Great committees and coalitions that's working through that. Just exploring that whole social justice piece and talking with family and friends. And I know folks are a little divided in some families, but find a middle. Find a way to conversate through difference and have those difficult conversations. And then lastly, when I'm in circumstances where I'm talking about really, really intense, tough information, I always reset my energy. Your self-care matters. It matters. Turn some of this stuff off. Take a moment, and what I do is I wash my hands in ice cold water to come back to present moment. As she said, our trauma will take us from this particular space. And before we know it, we're arguing with people. We're cutting folks off on the road. We're in the grocery store, causing a commotion. We're mad at people. We don't even know why we're upset or what we just watched on social media or a conversation we overheard and we took it in and we're carrying it with us. So for me, those are just a couple of things that I try to do to work through it. And I also do engage in a little civil discourse as well.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ross,
And of course, my answer is going to be go to counselor. Because part of going to in counseling too, is being able to take your very unique purpose and say, how do I make a difference? Now, if I tried to get up here and be poetic, I'll be like, no, stop it. That's her purpose, that's her calling. And so she can say and use words that's going to inspire you in such an artistic way. Sometimes we know what our purpose is, sometimes we don't, sometimes it shifts. Go to therapy to be able to talk about who you are, process the feelings of what you had here today and say like, I think I want to do something, but I don't know. Because guess what you're going to do? You're going to tell your story. And as you tell your story, you're going to find in, how do I weave my story in with that one? How do I make a difference not only for me, but for other people who are around me? And so that's your plug, that's your nudge. Go to therapy.
Thank you, Dr. Dorf.
Well, I'm a music historian, so obviously I have a listening list for you. But seriously, I mean, like, as I was sitting and listening to this concert, I was thinking about other things that I've listened to, that I've been thinking about, and how they're in conversation. I've been thinking a lot about the music of Nina Simone, and the ways in which Nina Simone, in her work, engages with fear, and anger, and grief in different ways. The way in Strange Fruit, in her performance of Strange Fruit, we feel that grief and that fear. And in Mississippi Goddamn, we feel her anger, right? I've been thinking a lot about Kendrick Lamar, Mr. Morale, and United Grief, this song that is about grief and the ways in which we all grieve. I'm thinking about the eclectic mix of work on this program, just to quote Kendrick Lamar, Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, right? We all grieve different, right? We all grieve different. So, I encourage you to listen to more music.
Of course, Mr. Thompson, you have our closing word.
Well, you know, my dissertation is on Nina Simone's 1964 concert at Carnegie Hall. So, where she premiered Mississippi Goddamn. The year before, Lorraine Hansberry came up to her after MLK was imprisoned in Birmingham and said, "What are you doing for your people?" She was singing Little Girl Blue and other Tin Pan Alley and Porgy. And then Medgar Evers was assassinated in Mississippi that summer, and then she was in a rage, and she had to write Mississippi Goddamn. And I studied her journey to this point because this piece was the beginning of my journey as an artist, trying to create art that makes the world better somehow. And I know I'm asking a lot of my imagination, but the imagination for me is the most important tool for resistance. If we can imagine a world with equality, imagine the dismantling of hierarchies, imagining an alternative to imperialist, capitalist, heteronormative patriarchy, white supremacist patriarchy, then we can know which direction to move. But to really answer your question, for me, the foundation of my craft as a composer, almost paradoxically, is listening. To listen to what is inside me and to listen to the community that I wish to serve. And so I would encourage you all to really open your ears, open your hearts, and listen in and out. We engage in this as music lovers this evening, listening to the grief that is in all of these pieces. But I think we can do a better job of really listening to each other. A lot of times as a composer, I've been in a room where I've suggested I'd like to write an opera on this story, and someone will say, well, what about me? What's in that for me? Because I'm trying to write a blackity-black story or whatever. And what we need to realize in this country is that a lot of the media that we are fed is segregated. If something is black, we're like, I'm not going to engage with because I'm not Black. But I'm so grateful to see people that don't look like me here, people that look like me are here. It's really important for us to try and seek these moments in which we can actually listen to each other. It makes the democracy function, especially when it's under attack. So I encourage you all to listen to each other.
You all join me in thanking our panelists for generously sharing their time, wisdom, and perspective with us tonight. I would also like to ask you to join me in thanking our phenomenal conductor and artistic director, Mr. Neil Gittleman, for his courage, his vision, and for his astounding gifts in curating tonight's performance. And lastly, give yourselves a hand. You all are beautiful. You all are beautiful. Thank you for staying for this important discussion. We share this greater Dayton community. We are neighbors, co-workers, and acquaintances, but we don't always take the time to share one another's lived experiences. Tonight, we've been blessed to do some of that. And for those who are true night owls, we invite you to hang out for a bit longer in the lobby, where DPAA has arranged for complimentary Starbucks coffee for all who would like to continue the conversation. Again, thank you all, and good night.